In the small, forgotten town of Black Hollow, the nights were long and the silence was thick. The townsfolk rarely spoke of the forest that bordered the town's edge, a dense, gnarled stretch of trees that seemed to swallow the moonlight whole. For decades, a chilling legend had haunted Black Hollow, a shadow that appeared every night at midnight, standing just beyond the tree line, watching. No one knew where the shadow came from or what it wanted. Some said it was the restless spirit of a man who vanished in the woods long ago. Others whispered it was a curse, a dark presence that fed on fear. But everyone agreed on one thing. If you saw the shadow, you were never the same again. When a group of friends, drawn by curiosity and the thrill of the unknown, decide to confront the shadow, they uncover secrets buried deep beneath the town's surface, secrets that some would kill to keep hidden. As midnight approaches, the line between reality and nightmare blurs, and the shadow's true nature begins to reveal itself. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, twisted shadows over the cracked pavement of Black Hollow's main street. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a reminder that autumn was settling in. Streetlights flickered on, their weak glow barely piercing the growing darkness. At the edge of town, near the old gas station that had been closed for years, 4 friends gathered. They were an unlikely group, bound not by shared history, but by a shared obsession with the town's most enduring mystery. Lena, the unofficial leader, was the first to arrive. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and her eyes scanned the forest's edge nervously. She had always been fascinated by the shadow, ever since she was a child. Her grandfather had told her stories about it, stories that had kept her awake at night. "Where is everyone?" she muttered, glancing at her watch. Moments later, a rustle in the bushes announced the arrival of Mark, the skeptic of the group. Tall and broad-shouldered, Mark had never believed in ghosts or curses. To him, the shadow was just a trick of the light, a story to scare children. "Sorry I'm late," he said, brushing dirt from his jeans. "Traffic was a nightmare." Lena gave him a pointed look. "You don't have a car?" Mark shrugged. "I walked." Next came Sarah, the quiet one. She moved with a cautious grace, her eyes darting nervously toward the forest. Sarah had always been sensitive to the strange things in Black Hollow, the way the wind seemed to whisper secrets, the way shadows moved just out of sight. "I don't like this," she said softly. "Maybe we shouldn't." "Too late for that," Lena interrupted. "We're here now." Finally, there was Jake, the joker of the group. His easy smile and carefree attitude were a mask for the fear he tried to hide. He pulled a flashlight from his backpack and clicked it on, the beam cutting through the darkness. "All right, team," Jake said, grinning. "Let's find this shadow and put an end to the mystery." The 4 friends moved toward the forest, the crunch of leaves underfoot, the only sound breaking the silence. The trees loomed overhead, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. As they stepped beneath the canopy, the temperature dropped noticeably, and the air grew heavy. "Midnight's in an hour," Lena said, checking her watch again. "We'll wait near the old clearing. That's where people say the shadow appears." The clearing was a small break in the forest, surrounded by ancient oaks and maples. In the center stood a weathered stone monument, half covered in moss and ivy. It was said to mark the spot where a man named Thomas Gray had disappeared nearly 50 years ago. the first time the shadow was seen. As they settled in, the friends shared stories and theories, trying to keep their nerves at bay. Mark rolled his eyes at the ghost stories while Sarah clutched her jacket tightly. Jake kept the mood light with jokes, but even he couldn't hide the tension in his voice. The minutes dragged on, each tick of the clock echoing in the stillness. Then, as the town's old clock tower began to chime midnight, a chill swept through the clearing. Lena's breath caught in her throat. "There," she whispered. At the edge of the clearing, just beyond the reach of their flashlights, a dark shape materialized. It was tall and thin, its edges blurred as if it were made of smoke or shadow. It didn't move, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Mark stepped forward, squinting. "It's just a trick of the light." But the shadow shifted, and a low, whispering sound filled the air, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Leave. Now." The friends froze, the weight of the shadow's gaze pressing down on them. Whatever this thing was, it was real. And it was waiting. The whispering voice seemed to seep into their minds, cold and hollow, like the wind slipping through cracks in an old house. Lena's heart pounded so loudly she was sure the others could hear it. The shadow remained still, its form flickering like a candle flame caught in a draft. "Did you hear that?" Sarah's voice trembled, barely above a whisper. Mark swallowed hard, his usual bravado faltering. "It's just the wind," he said, though his eyes never left the shadow. Jake took a step forward, shining his flashlight directly at the figure. The beam passed through it, as if it were made of smoke, but the shadow didn't dissipate. Instead, it seemed to grow darker, more solid. "Leave. Now," the voice repeated, this time louder, more urgent. Lena clenched her fists. "We can't just run away. We need to know what it wants." "Are you crazy?" Jake hissed. "This thing just told us to leave. That's a pretty clear message." Sarah nodded in agreement. "Maybe it's trying to protect us." Mark's skepticism was gone now, replaced by a cold dread. "Or it's warning us because something worse is coming." The shadow shifted again, and the whispering turned into a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the clearing. The friends instinctively took a step back, but Lena stood her ground. "Who are you?" she called out, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. "What do you want from us?" For a moment, the shadow was silent. Then a new voice emerged, clearer, more human, but distorted as if spoken through a broken radio. "Thomas Gray. Trapped. Beneath. The roots." The name sent a chill down Lena's spine. Thomas Gray was the man who had vanished in these woods decades ago, the first person linked to the shadow. His disappearance had never been solved, and the town's older residents still whispered about it in hushed tones. "Trapped beneath the roots?" Sarah repeated, her eyes wide. "What does that mean?" The shadow seemed to pulse, the darkness swirling like ink in water. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it began to fade, melting back into the night. "Wait!" Lena called after it, but the clearing was empty once more. The friends stood in stunned silence, the weight of the encounter pressing down on them. "What now?" Jake finally asked, breaking the silence. "We find out what happened to Thomas Gray," Lena said, her voice resolute. "If he's trapped beneath the roots, maybe that's where the shadow comes from." Mark shook his head. "This is insane. We don't even know if any of this is real." "But we saw it," Sarah said quietly. "We heard it." Lena nodded. And if we don't figure this out, who knows what will happen next midnight? The group agreed to meet the next day at the town library, hoping to uncover any records or clues about Thomas Gray's disappearance. As they made their way back through the forest, the shadows seemed to close in around them, the whispering voice echoing faintly in their ears. That night, none of them slept. Lena lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the shadows' warning replaying in her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that something ancient and terrible was stirring beneath Black Hollow, something that had been waiting for them all along. The next morning, the four friends met at the Black Hollow Public Library, a small, dusty building that smelled of old paper and forgotten memories. The sun filtered weakly through grimy windows, casting pale light over rows of bookshelves that seemed to stretch endlessly. Lena led the way to the local history section, where she hoped to find something about Thomas Gray. The town's past was a tangled web of stories, many of them half forgotten or deliberately erased. But if there was any record of the man's disappearance, it would be here. Mark, still skeptical but willing to help, pulled out his phone to take notes. Sarah clutched a notebook, ready to jot down anything unusual. Jake wandered the aisles, occasionally flipping through a book, but mostly distracted. Lena scanned the shelves until she found a thin, leather-bound volume titled Black Hollow, A Chronicle of Shadows. The cover was cracked and worn, the pages yellowed with age. She opened it carefully, the spine creaking in protest. The book was a collection of newspaper clippings, personal accounts, and town records dating back over a century. Lena's eyes caught a faded article from 1975, the year Thomas Gray disappeared. Local man vanishes in forest. Search continues. The article described how Thomas, a reclusive woodsman, had gone missing without a trace. Search parties scoured the forest for weeks, but found nothing. The townspeople whispered that the forest had claimed him, that something dark lurked beneath the trees. Lena read aloud. Witnesses reported seeing a shadowy figure near the clearing where Thomas was last seen. Some believe the forest itself is alive, holding secrets beneath its roots. Mark scoffed. Sounds like a ghost story to me. Sarah frowned. There has to be more. What about the roots? The shadow said he's trapped beneath them. Lena flipped through the pages, searching for anything related to the forest floor or the clearing. Then she found a hand-drawn map, crudely sketched, but detailed enough to show the layout of the woods and a spot marked with an X near the clearing. This must be where Thomas disappeared, Lena said, pointing to the map. Jake leaned in, his usual grin replaced by a serious expression. So what? We dig him up? Not yet, Lena replied. We need to understand what we're dealing with first. As they continued to search, Sarah found a journal tucked between two books. The cover was plain, but the handwriting inside was neat and deliberate. It belonged to a man named Elias Crow, a local historian who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances years earlier. Lena read a passage aloud. The forest is not just trees and earth. It breathes, it watches. The roots twist like veins, holding memories and pain. Thomas Gray's fate is tied to something ancient, a darkness that feeds on fear and silence. The room seemed to grow colder as Lena spoke the words. The friends exchanged uneasy glances. Elias Crow disappeared too? Mark asked, his voice low. Yeah, Lena said. And his last notes suggest he was close to uncovering something about the shadow. Jake slammed the journal shut. Great. So now we're dealing with a curse, a shadow, and a missing historian. This just keeps getting better. Sarah shivered. We need to be careful. Whatever this is, it's dangerous. Lena nodded. Tomorrow night we go back to the clearing. We'll bring some tools, maybe a camera, a shovel. We have to find out what's beneath those roots. Mark hesitated. I don't like this. We're poking at something we don't understand. But if we don't, Lena said firmly, the shadow will keep watching, and who knows what will happen next midnight. The friends packed up their things, the weight of the day's discoveries settling heavily on their shoulders. As they left the library, the sky was already darkening, the first stars beginning to twinkle above Black Hollow. Lena glanced back at the building, a strange unease twisting in her gut. The shadow was no longer just a story. It was real, and it was waiting. Night fell quickly over Black Hollow, swallowing the town in a thick blanket of darkness. The moon hung low and pale, casting a ghostly glow over the forest's edge. The air was crisp and cold, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Lena, Mark, Sarah, and Jake gathered once again near the old gas station, their breath visible in the chilly air. Each of them carried something: flashlights, a small shovel, a camera, and a coil of rope. The weight of the previous day's discoveries pressed heavily on their minds, but none dared speak of their growing fear. Ready? Lena asked, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. Mark gave a reluctant nod. As ready as I'll ever be. They moved toward the forest, the crunch of leaves underfoot the only sound breaking the silence. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, their branches twisting and creaking in the night breeze. The deeper they went, the darker it became, the flashlight beams barely cutting through the thick canopy. When they reached the clearing, the stone monument stood like a forgotten sentinel, half swallowed by moss and ivy. The air here felt heavier, charged with an unseen energy that made their skin prickle. Lena shone her flashlight over the ground near the monument. The earth was soft and damp, the roots of the surrounding trees sprawling like tangled veins beneath the surface. Here, she said, kneeling down. This is where the shadow said Thomas Gray is trapped. Jake crouched beside her, pulling out the camera. Let's document everything. If something happens, we'll have proof. Mark began digging carefully near the base of a large oak, the shovel biting into the earth with a dull thud. Sarah stood watch, her eyes darting nervously into the darkness beyond the clearing. Minutes passed, the only sounds the scrape of the shovel and the occasional rustle of leaves. Suddenly, Mark's shovel hit something hard. Got something, he said, brushing dirt away to reveal a wooden box, old and weathered. Lena's heart raced. Open it. Mark pried the box open, revealing a collection of yellowed papers and a small, rusted key. Lena picked up the papers, her eyes scanning the faded handwriting. It's a journal, she said. Thomas Gray's. The journal's pages told a chilling story. Thomas had discovered something in the forest, something ancient and malevolent. He wrote of a shadow that watched him, whispering warnings and threats. He described a hidden chamber beneath the roots, a place where the forest's darkness was strongest. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the clearing, extinguishing their flashlights. Panic surged through the group as darkness swallowed them whole. Everyone stay calm, Lena said, fumbling for her spare batteries. As she worked, a faint glow appeared near the base of the oak tree. The roots seemed to pulse with a dark light, twisting and writhing as if alive. "Look," Sarah whispered, pointing. The ground beneath the roots began to shift, revealing a narrow opening, a hidden entrance leading down into the earth. Jake swallowed hard. "Well, that's not creepy at all." Lena took a deep breath. "We have to see what's down there. It might be the key to stopping the shadow." Mark hesitated. "This is insane. We don't know what's down there." "But we have to try," Lena insisted. "For Thomas, for Black Hollow." One by one, they descended into the darkness, the air growing colder and heavier with each step. The narrow tunnel opened into a cavernous space, the walls covered in twisted roots and strange symbols carved deep into the wood. In the center of the chamber lay a stone altar, stained dark with age. On it rested a small, ornate box, the source of the shadow's power perhaps. As Lena reached out to touch the box, a voice echoed through the chamber, low, angry, and filled with sorrow. "Leave or be consumed." The friends froze, the weight of the shadow's warning pressing down on them. But Lena's resolve only hardened. "We're not leaving," she said. "Not until we end this." Lena's fingers trembled as they hovered over the ornate box resting on the stone altar. The air in the cavern was thick and suffocating, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something far older, decay, sorrow, and something darker, almost alive. The strange symbols carved into the roots around them seemed to pulse faintly, glowing with an eerie blue light that cast long, twisting shadows on the walls. The friends stood frozen, caught between fear and curiosity. "Are you sure about this?" Mark's voice was barely audible, his usual skepticism replaced by dread. Lena swallowed hard. "We have to know what's inside. It might be the source of the shadow, or the key to stopping it." Sarah clutched her jacket tighter, her eyes wide. "What if it's a trap?" Jake cracked a nervous smile. "Well, if it is, at least we'll go down together." Taking a deep breath, Lena slowly lifted the lid of the box. Inside lay a small, blackened object, a twisted piece of wood, gnarled and charred, shaped vaguely like a hand. Wrapped around it was a faded ribbon, embroidered with strange symbols that matched those on the roots. As she touched the object, a sudden jolt of cold shot through her arm, and the cavern seemed to shudder. The whispering voice returned, louder and more urgent. "Release me! Free me!" Lena pulled back, heart pounding. "What is this?" The voice answered, echoing through the chamber like a mournful wind. "I am bound, trapped, by fear and silence. Thomas Gray tried to free me, but the roots hold tight." Mark stepped forward, shining his flashlight on the altar. "So the shadow, it's not just a spirit. It's something trapped here, tied to the forest." Sarah nodded slowly. "And it's been watching us, waiting for someone to set it free." Jake swallowed hard, or waiting to drag us down with it. Lena looked at the twisted hand again. "If we free it, will it stop haunting the town, or will it destroy everything?" The voice answered, softer now, almost pleading. "Freedom is pain, but also release. The shadow is both curse and guardian. Only by breaking the roots can the cycle end." The friends exchanged uneasy glances. The choice was clear. They could try to break the roots and free whatever was trapped, risking unknown consequences, or leave the shadow to watch and wait, condemning Black Hollow to endless fear. Lena made her decision. "We have to try. Mark nodded reluctantly. All right, but we do this carefully. They searched the cavern for something to sever the roots. Jake found an old, rusted hatchet leaning against the wall, its blade dull but still sharp enough. Lena took it, feeling the weight of the decision in her hands. One by one, they began cutting through the thick roots that bound the altar and the box. The roots resisted, twisting and writhing as if alive, but the hatchet bit through the wood with steady strikes. As the last root snapped, a sudden, deafening roar filled the cavern. The ground trembled, and the shadows on the walls twisted violently. A figure began to emerge from the darkness, tall and thin, made of swirling smoke and shadow, but with eyes that burned like embers. It was the shadow that had haunted Black Hollow for decades, now free, but it was not the malevolent force they had feared. Instead, it radiated sorrow and pain, a trapped soul finally released. "Thank you," the shadow whispered, its voice echoing like a breeze through the trees. "The curse is broken." The cavern brightened as the shadow dissolved into a cascade of light, the oppressive weight lifting from the air. The friends stood in stunned silence, the forest around them suddenly alive with the sound of rustling leaves and distant birdsong. Outside, the first light of dawn broke over Black Hollow, washing the town in a warm, golden glow. Lena smiled, exhausted but hopeful. The shadow was gone, and with it, the fear that had gripped their town for so long. But as they emerged from the forest, none of them noticed the small, dark shape watching from the treetops. A new shadow, waiting for midnight. The dawn light spilled over Black Hollow like a promise, softening the edges of the town's worn buildings and casting long shadows that stretched lazily across the streets. The forest, once a place of dread and whispered fears, now seemed almost peaceful, bathed in the gentle glow of morning. Lena, Mark, Sarah, and Jake emerged from the woods, their faces pale but determined. The weight that had pressed on their chests for so long was gone, replaced by a fragile hope. "We did it," Sarah breathed, her voice trembling with relief. Jake cracked a tired smile. "Yeah, we actually did it. I'm impressed." Mark, still catching his breath, looked around the clearing. "I don't feel that watching anymore." Lena nodded. "The shadow's gone. Whatever was trapped beneath those roots is free." They made their way back to town, the forest behind them quiet and still. The morning air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and earth, and for the first time in years, Black Hollow felt like a place where people could breathe again. But as the friends walked, none of them noticed the small, dark shape perched high in the treetops, its eyes glowing faintly in the morning light. It was smaller than the shadow they had released, but no less ominous. The new watcher blinked slowly, its form shifting like smoke caught in a breeze. It had been waiting, learning, growing in the darkness. And now it was ready. Back in town, life began to return to normal. The old gas station was still abandoned, the streets still cracked and worn, but the oppressive fear that had hung over Black Hollow was lifting. People spoke again, children played outside, and the nights felt less heavy. Lena and her friends met at the diner, sharing coffee and quiet smiles. They talked about what they had discovered, the journal entries, the shadow, and the strange cavern beneath the forest. "We should tell someone," Sarah said. "The town needs to know what happened." Mark shook his head. "Who would believe us? We're just a bunch of kids chasing ghost stories." Jake laughed. Yeah, and what if the shadow comes back? We don't want to be the ones who brought it back. Lena looked out the window, her mind still on the forest. Maybe it's not about bringing it back. Maybe it's about being ready if it does. That night, as the clock in the town square struck midnight, the new watcher stirred. It slipped silently from the treetops, a wisp of darkness that moved with purpose. It watched the town below, its eyes glowing faintly as it studied the streets, the houses, the people who had forgotten the fear. But the watcher was patient. It knew that fear could be rekindled, that shadows could grow. And it waited. Days passed, and the friends tried to return to their normal lives, but the memory of the shadow lingered. Strange things began to happen, flickering lights, whispers in the wind, shadows moving just beyond sight. One evening, Sarah called the group, her voice tight with worry. I saw it, the shadow, not the one we freed, but something else, smaller, faster, watching me. Lena's heart sank. We need to meet, now. They gathered once more at the clearing, flashlights in hand, nerves frayed but determination strong. The forest was alive with unseen eyes, the air thick with anticipation. The shadow that watches at midnight was not gone. It was only beginning. The clearing was darker than usual, the moon hidden behind thick clouds that swallowed the stars. The friends gathered silently, their flashlights casting narrow beams that barely penetrated the dense forest around them. The air was heavy, charged with a tension that made their skin crawl. Sarah was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. I saw it again last night, the smaller shadow. It was watching me from the edge of my window. Mark rubbed his temples, trying to shake the growing headache. I don't like this. We thought we were done with this nightmare. Jake's usual bravado was gone, replaced by a grim seriousness. Whatever it is, it's different, smarter, more aware. Lena nodded, her eyes scanning the dark tree line. The shadow we freed was trapped, bound by the roots. This new one, it's free. It's learning. A sudden rustle in the bushes made them all jump. Flashlights swung toward the sound, but there was nothing, only the whisper of leaves in the wind. We need a plan, Lena said firmly. We can't just wait for it to come to us. Mark pulled out his phone, scrolling through notes and photos from their previous nights. Maybe the journal has something. Elias Crow's notes mentioned a cycle, that the shadow's power grows with fear. Sarah shivered. So if we stay calm, maybe it can't hurt us? Jake scoffed. Easy to say when you're not the one being watched. Lena took a deep breath. We need to find out what this new shadow wants. If it's watching us, maybe it's trying to communicate. They decided to set up a watch that night, taking turns sitting near the clearing with cameras and recorders, hoping to catch any sign of the shadow. Hours passed in tense silence. The forest seemed to hold its breath, every crack of a twig or rustle of leaves making their hearts race. Just before midnight, a cold wind swept through the clearing, and the shadows deepened. From the darkness, the smaller shadow emerged, a flicker of smoke and darkness, its eyes glowing faintly red. It moved with unnatural grace, circling the group, watching, studying. Lena stepped forward, holding out her hand. We don't want to hurt you. We want to understand. The shadow paused, its form flickering like a flame in the wind. Then, in a voice like a whisper carried on the breeze, it spoke. Fear feeds. Silence binds, break the cycle, or be consumed. The friends exchanged uneasy glances. The message was clear. The shadow was warning them, but also threatening. We have to break the cycle, Lena said. But how? Mark pointed to the journal. Elias Crow wrote about a ritual, something to end the shadow's hold on the town. Sarah nodded. We need to find it before it's too late. The shadow faded into the night, leaving behind a cold emptiness. The friends knew their fight was far from over. The next day, the four friends returned to the library, their faces drawn and tired. The weight of the shadow's warning hung over them like a storm cloud. They needed answers, and fast. Lena pulled the worn journal of Elias Crow from her backpack, flipping through the fragile pages with trembling fingers. The handwriting was neat but hurried. The ink faded in places. Here, she said, pointing to a passage near the back. To break the cycle, one must confront the shadow at the stroke of midnight in the heart of the forest. A circle of salt must be drawn, and a flame lit to call the shadow forth. Only by naming the shadow's true name can the curse be broken. Mark frowned. A circle of salt? That sounds like something out of a horror movie. Jake smirked. Yeah, but if it works, I'm all for it. Sarah's voice was quiet but determined. We need to find the shadow's true name. That's the key. Lena nodded. The journal mentions that the name is hidden in the symbols carved into the roots beneath the clearing. We need to go back tonight. As night fell, the friends gathered their supplies: salt, matches, candles, and the journal. The forest awaited them, dark and silent, the trees looming like ancient guardians. When they reached the clearing, Lena began drawing a large circle of salt around the stone monument and the altar beneath the roots. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. Jake lit the candles, placing them evenly around the circle. The flickering flames cast eerie shapes on the trees, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. At the stroke of midnight, a chill swept through the clearing, and the shadow appeared, larger now, more defined, its eyes glowing like embers. Lena stepped forward, holding the journal. We know your name. We know your story. We want to set you free. The shadow's voice was a low rumble. You cannot break what is bound by fear and silence. Lena opened the journal to the page with the symbols. Your name is written here. We will speak it and end this. She traced the symbols with her finger, then spoke the name aloud. A strange, ancient word that seemed to echo through the forest. The shadow recoiled, its form flickering wildly. The roots beneath the clearing began to tremble, the earth shaking as if waking from a long sleep. Freedom, the shadow whispered, its voice filled with sorrow and relief. The circle of salt glowed faintly, and the candles flared bright, casting a brilliant light that pushed back the darkness. Then, with a final, mournful sigh, the shadow dissolved into the night, leaving the clearing bathed in peaceful silence. The friends stood together, exhausted but victorious. The curse was broken. As they left the forest, the first light of dawn touched the horizon, promising a new beginning for Black Hollow. But deep in the shadows, a faint whisper lingered, a reminder that some darkness never truly fades. The sun rose over Black Hollow, casting warm light across the town's quiet streets. For the first time in years, the air felt lighter, as if the weight of the shadow's presence had finally lifted. Birds sang in the trees, and the wind carried the scent of fresh earth and blooming flowers. Lena, Mark, Sarah, and Jake met at the diner, their faces tired but relieved. The events of the past nights had left them drained, but there was a sense of accomplishment in the air. "We did it," Sarah said softly, stirring her coffee. "The shadow is gone." Mark nodded, though a flicker of doubt lingered in his eyes. "I want to believe that, but what if it's just hiding, waiting for another chance?" Jake shrugged. "Well, if it comes back, we'll be ready." Lena smiled faintly. "We broke the cycle. The curse was tied to fear and silence. Now that we've named it and faced it, the town can heal." The friends talked late into the morning, sharing memories and plans for the future. Black Hollow had been changed forever, but so had they. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lena walked alone toward the forest's edge. She felt drawn there, as if something was calling her back. The clearing was peaceful, bathed in the soft glow of twilight. The stone monument stood silent, the roots beneath it still and calm. Lena knelt and touched the earth, feeling a faint warmth beneath her fingers. The forest seemed alive, but not in the way it had been before. Now it was a place of quiet strength, not fear. Suddenly, a soft breeze stirred the leaves, and Lena heard a whisper, not of warning or threat, but of gratitude. "Thank you." She smiled, tears prickling her eyes. The shadow was gone, but its story remained, a reminder of the darkness that can live in silence, and the light that comes from facing it. Back in town, life slowly returned to normal. The gas station was still abandoned, the streets still cracked, but the people of Black Hollow walked a little taller, their eyes a little brighter. The friends stayed close, bound by the secret they shared and the bond forged in the shadow's darkness. And though the nights were no longer haunted by whispers or watching shadows, they knew that some mysteries never truly end. They only wait for the next midnight. The weeks that followed felt like a dream. Black Hollow slowly shed its cloak of fear, the oppressive silence replaced by cautious hope. The forest, once a place of dread, became a quiet refuge where children played and neighbors gathered. Lena, Mark, Sarah, and Jake found themselves changed, bound by the ordeal they had survived. Their friendship deepened, forged in the fires of fear and courage. One crisp evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned a deep shade of purple, the friends gathered once more at the clearing. It was their way of honoring what they had faced, a silent promise to remember and protect their town. Lena stood by the stone monument, her fingers tracing the carved symbols one last time. The roots beneath were still, the earth calm. "Do you think it's really over?" Sarah asked, her voice soft. Lena looked up at the darkening sky. "I think the shadow was never just a thing to fear. It was a part of us, our silence, our secrets, our pain. We faced it, named it, and set it free." Mark smiled faintly. "So no more midnight watchers?" Jake laughed. "Let's hope not, but if there is, we'll be ready." As the clock in the town square began to chime midnight, a gentle breeze stirred the leaves. For a moment, the friends held their breath, waiting, but the forest remained silent. No shadow appeared, no whisper echoed, only the peaceful rustle of the wind through the trees. Lena smiled, feeling a weight lift from her chest. The cycle was broken, the curse was ended. They turned to leave the clearing, the first light of dawn beginning to touch the horizon. But as they walked away, A faint shimmer flickered in the corner of Lena's eye, a soft, warm glow rising from the roots beneath the monument. A final whisper, barely audible, drifted on the breeze. "Thank you for the light." And with that, the shadow was gone forever.